This episode of Chains is sponsored exclusively by Charlie Foxtrot Brewing. Ask about beers from this veteran-owned brewery in tap rooms across Southwest Florida and Western North Carolina. Thank you for supporting our veterans. Chains, Part 12. Written by Nicole and Dustin Dhonash. Narrated by Lucy Hillman. I stood next to the door, hoping there was no one on the other side. After everything that had happened, I wasn't even sure that I could outrun the man with the caged leg. I didn't want to end up one of those girls from the movies, running from a bad guy in the woods, falling down, and getting caught again. I was thinking about sneaking out when I heard the metal scraping on the other side of the door. He was back. I heard dull thuds every now and then, somewhere far away, and I held my breath each time as he passed nearer to the door. This was an old place, and any noise could travel, even my shuddering breaths. On top of the thuds, there were sharp metal clangs. What was he doing? It was quiet for a couple minutes, and I was getting anxious to move. I reached for the doorknob and turned the handle slowly. With how old this place was, I knew the door could creak. I opened it as slowly as I could. I was in some type of old barn. A metal utility light hung from the cord that extended up into the rafters. To my right was something that resembled a kitchen, with random utensils and tools haphazardly across the counters. On a central counter, there was some kind of round, thin cage made out of what looked like barbed wire. I had to remind myself not to get distracted with this insanity and to just get out of there. I moved down the hallway and paused at the next corner. Still, no sounds. My heart was racing. It couldn't be this easy. I could see a small room to my left. The door was open and a light suddenly flicked on. I gasped at the sight of Chris, unconscious, maybe dead, lying on a weather-beaten couch. His arm was mangled, and the man with the caged leg was standing over him with his back to me, examining Chris. I quickly moved back down the hall that led to the stairs. He clunked back towards the kitchen, leaving the dangling utility light swinging in a small, uneven circle. Hiding from view, I could hear him pick up the small cage that was on the island and bring it back over to where Chris was passed out. It suddenly dawned on me. The captor's caged leg. He's going to cage up Chris's arm the same way. I heard the crack of Chris's arm breaking back to center and a gut-wrenching scream come from Chris as he awoke from the pain. "You're one of us now, boy," said the caged freak. "I suppose you'll want to go to the house to show Ma your new trophy." Chris sobbed painfully for a few moments and said, "Who was down there? There were 2 people. I think one of them hit me." "Just that nosy law boy. He's mine, and one of those house women that were trying to get away. I found her out by the fence, gave her a smack on the head, and put her downstairs," said the caged man. "Which one?" Chris asked with sudden urgency. I tried my best not to think of what house women might mean and why Chris might be concerned about any of them. "Oh, you know they all look the same to me," said the old man with a snarling laugh. "She got further than old Lawboy did, though," he added. "Damn it, just tell me who," said Chris, as he started to protest, his statement turning to cries of pain as the device was clamped onto his already mangled arm. "Like I said, it's time to show Ma," the man bellowed over Chris's cries. I heard him pick Chris up and head out of the front doorway into the night. There was a brief struggle outside, just as I heard Chris yell, "Hannah, run!" Somehow he knew I was here. I thought for a moment. I certainly wasn't responsible for Chris getting mixed up with these freaks. If he'd listened to me, we'd both be bowling, drinking, and eating fried cheese right now. But no, instead he had to be out here in the cold, forsaken woods, doing who knows what with house girls and weirdos. I hated that I was in this situation, and I hated that I felt sorry for him. He deserved to be yelled at, smacked, maybe exiled, but not this. Not a broken arm. Not whatever was happening to him right now. Against my better judgment, I resolved to help him. I was starting to get sore from being tossed around and manhandled by that hobbled old man. I shrugged it off as best I could and moved from the hallway into the barn proper. It was full-on dark now, and the only lights in this giant space were the two that dangled from cords. One of those was in the main section. The other was in the small room where Chris was tortured. I went into the small room and grabbed the still swinging light, patiently pulling it from the rafters and piling the huge blue extension cord at my feet. A sudden gust of bitter cold blew through the barn, chilling me further and sending the light in the main section swinging in a large arc. I shivered against the cold and turned off my utility light, ready to use it when needed. The ridiculousness of the situation was setting in quickly. I was now freezing, standing in a barn in the middle of nowhere, making a plan to rescue my boyfriend from someone who was clearly a psychopath, one that he knew and apparently wanted to be around. I pushed the self-doubt aside for the moment and moved to one of the other small rooms on this side of the barn. I flicked the light on for a moment, which made my shivering all the more apparent. In the room, there was a rusty toolbox, a giant pile of hay with some bedding, and to my amazement, a small space heater. I unplugged my utility light and connected the heater. The small orange glow promised heat. I wrapped myself in one of the blankets, trying hard not to think of how gross it probably was, and waited a while to warm up. My thoughts turned to the stranger from the tunnels below. The psycho with the caged legs seemed to mock him just after he broke Chris's arm. Maybe there were more people like Chris here, but why? Who would purposefully stay around someone like that? The more questions I had, the more this whole thing seemed like a stupid idea. If I could get to a phone, I could call the police. Oh, a barn phone, sure, I joked darkly to myself as I moved some of the hay around the space heater. Immediately, the idea hit me. I gathered up the blanket and used it to funnel the heat onto me before fastening it to me with some of the loose twine. I put the heater face up against the wall and then set one of the smaller bales leaning on top of it. I dub thee Abby the Space Heater, I said, as I started kicking small clumps of hay into the heating element, which caught fire immediately. Smoke was already pouring out of the bale. I set a few more up around the heater before heading over to the tree line. It was no barn phone, but the neighbors would surely call someone. I could see a house up the hill in the direction that Chris was carried. There was no sign of him or the psychopath with the caged leg. Having endured all of that, the dark woods seemed less creepy, safe even. Suddenly, I heard some yelling in the distance. It was the psychopath. I moved through the woods some distance, closer to the house. From there, I could see him, still carrying Chris, yelling something at the house. Several people came out and began to cheer at Caged Leg. An old woman came out shortly after, and everyone gathered around her. She was speaking to them. I couldn't make out what she said. After a bit, everyone turned to the psychopath. He lifted Chris above his head. They all kneeled. I moved deeper into the woods, bewildered by what I'd just seen. The people from the house began to assemble large pieces of wood in the center of the yard. They were building a fire pit. A terrifying metal contraption was wheeled near to the fire. It was built from one of the industrial sprinkler systems used on farms, but the central parts had been cut and reassembled into a cage. The old woman began a chant that a few of the others picked up. My stomach became a pit. Something terrible was about to happen here. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me and almost screamed out. I whipped around and there was no one, nothing. I heard the same sound again and all around. It was starting to rain.